Good afternoon. I feel I should be reading the midday news, but I'm not. Welcome to the today's Dunstan Foundation Reconciliation Week event, Influencing Our Influencers, How to Build Reconciliation. Now, we're going to have a pause for a couple of minutes to allow latecomers to come online, and then we'll be underway. So be with you again shortly. Nainamane. Thank you, Uncle Lewis, for your welcome to country, to the Kaurna land upon which most of us are meeting. We know that some of us on this online webinar on Paramank or Ngarrindjeri land or other lands, but we appreciate this opportunity to be together for this significant Inberendi in Reconciliation Week. Reconciliation Week this year is having to do things in very different ways to normally, but it's pleasing to note just how much interest is happening about reconciliation events. Yesterday's virtual breakfast, for example, was a big success, organized by Reconciliation SA, the National Apology Anniversary Breakfast. And this week we would normally have the Lowitja O'Donoghue oration, which has had to be postponed to later in the year when Pat Anderson will be the orator. So we wanted very much to have an event this year during the week, and hence we have this opportunity today. So this seminar that you are part of, the Influencing Our Influencers, How to Build Reconciliation, is brought to you by the Don Dunstan Foundation and Reconciliation SA. And we would particularly like to thank BHP, who are the event sponsor, for helping this event to be put together. And likewise, of course, our major partners in the Don Dunstan Foundation, the University of Adelaide and Flinders University. Now, in this event today, we hope to cover a lot. We have only an hour to do so, but there's a lot of ground in which we could touch upon. We would like to have covered contemporary reconciliation actions such as closing the gap, Makarrata, the referendum, changes to the Constitution, and of course the implication of the COVID-19 aftermath. I'm currently chairing a social recovery committee on behalf of the state government to COVID-19, and we are acutely aware that the issues of COVID-19 affect everyone in South Australia, in all communities, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders within the broader community or in special parts of the state. Reconciliation must be a part of the social recovery of our state and of our country. Now, we won't have time to cover all these issues today, but we do hope to cover some of them in our questions. Now, the focus today is to bring together our partners, the University of Adelaide and Flinders University. We had also hoped to have Professor Irene Watson from the University of South Australia joining us, but unfortunately, urgent matters cropped up that have prevented her at the last minute from being part of today's program. As Uncle Lewis mentioned a few moments ago, the appointment of Pro-Vice-Chancellors for Aboriginal engagement by our universities is a significant step forward, not only within the university context, but the ways in which universities are part of the narrative formation of our community, influencers, in other words. Universities have had particular challenges and opportunities in relation to these issues, and we'll hear more about that during our discussion today. I want to now start and introduce our panel members. First of all, we have Professor Shane Hearn, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Indigenous Engagement at the University of Adelaide, and you should have, I hope, on a side screen his bio details. He is a Noongar man, and so welcome to you, Shane. And we also have Associate Professor Simone, Pro-Vice-Chancellor Indigenous at Flinders University, who is a Yankunytjatjara woman, and we welcome you to the seminar today, Simone. And I'm particularly pleased also to be able to announce that we have Shona Reid, who is the Executive Director of Reconciliation South Australia, and Shona has been working with me and others on the issue of social recovery to COVID-19 in our state. Welcome to you, Shona. Now, I want to open up with the first question for everybody. And by the way, a number of you have emailed questions in. We're not able to deal with all of them, but we will be dealing with some of them during this seminar. And it may be possible for some of the other questions to be addressed subsequently in follow-up. I'm looking to the producers here to see that we can organize that. So now, my first question, and I want to, Shane, I'll be starting with you, but I want to go through Simone as well. In your roles as Pro-Vice-Chancellors Indigenous within your respective universities, what do you see as the impact on higher education for your university? Shane.
Thanks, Lynn, and I'm really pleased to be here and commend the Dunstan Foundation for organising the event and allowing us to participate. Congratulations to that team. I think it's important to start in acknowledging all Aboriginal PVCs and the DVC across the nation, and acknowledging that their work is around innovation and transforming universities. So in that regard, it's a very important position because it's contributing to a changing environment all the time. But I think it's important to start with the core objectives of higher education in answering this question, and because that's where my passion lies. Education plays a major role throughout life. It prepares the next generation by reskilling to become engaged citizens and a commitment to solving problems and creating change. So that's a wonderful thing to be a part of, and higher education institutions play a major role in preparing and securing jobs, future, building resilience and moral character so that people can overcome life's challenges and succeed. And I'm interested in the idea of high quality education for all. And I think what the PVC role enables is for us as Aboriginal people understanding the history of the country and history of education. It gives us a seat at the table to join that dialogue and give the Aboriginal perspective. I'm of the view that, you know, there should be no student left behind, especially Aboriginal students. And unfortunately, the profile tells us that it's often the case that Aboriginal students are left behind, and it's not due to their capacity to perform at this level. Sometimes it's the structural inequalities. So I would hope that our roles are able to engage in those types of conversations. How do we unlock the bottlenecks? How do we address some of the blockages? And like all students, we need to be preparing Aboriginal students for a globalised world. The world is changing, and our students come with diverse interests across different faculties. They're an engaged group. They're energised, they're ready to learn. The structure of their family has changed. In most cases now, an Aboriginal person may not be the first person in their family to attend university. So these are real positive signs. So I think more than ever, the PV position gives us a voice in achieving those goals and incorporating the Aboriginal voice throughout the process. It gives us a seat at the table so that we can consider all elements of university business and where the Aboriginal narrative fits in to that. Universities incorporating, I think there's about 21 PVCs. I'm not entirely sure on that, but there's out of the 40 universities, there's about 20 PVC positions. And those universities that are incorporating the role into their governance structure, this is the first step in reconciliation and Indigenous perspectives into their core business, and first time that they would have incorporated Indigenous perspectives into core business. And these are great signals for universities and great opportunities for us as a PVC group. But it also means that we have to develop evidence-based practice, that we have to help people across the university, across the state, feel comfortable connecting to the Indigenous dialogues. So driving high performance and expecting that as the value really is the role of a PVC as well, is to know that we can contribute to that high performance that universities generally have. I guess the final thing to say is, with higher education funding, the Commonwealth grant schemes were frozen in 2018. So that means that and these were on 2017 levels. And also the idea of performance funding now is becoming more and more evident. So ensuring positive outcomes for students, particularly those from Aboriginal backgrounds and equity backgrounds, is not only a matter of social justice, but it also provides, it also is a financial necessity in this day and age. Other universities do this really well in terms of engaging the equity groups. And these are business areas that universities, GO8 mostly, really haven't had a strong presence in. But with this role and with other equity interest roles and with the changing funding models, it means that we have to be involved more. So, you know, more than ever, universities should be about creating institutional cultures that enable all students. And the PVC role connects with this dialogue and helps shift that dial in that direction.
Thanks very much, Shane. Now, Simone, could you talk to us about your perspectives from Flinders University?
That I'm meeting on the lands of the Kaurna Nation, but I also do want to acknowledge all traditional owners within South Australia and our various campus locations. I do that as a young gentleman, so thank you. I too agree with many of the sentiments that Shane has shared this morning. And I think critical to the appointment of Pro-Vice-Chancellors, Indigenous and DVC Indigenous, is about the emphasis of a whole university approach and leading and facilitating the prioritisation of Indigenous engagement across the university. And this really has to extend to all areas of the institution. In terms of Indigenous student success, I fundamentally agree with Shane's comments around our students and our students as a community within university spaces is very important. In terms of teaching and learning, I also think that as Indigenous peoples, we have a lot to offer in terms of Indigenous knowledges and perspectives within degree programs and curriculum. And so the roles that we play as academics, as scholars, but in leadership roles also leads to the importance of having those knowledges within our institutions. Obviously, research is also a very significant area, and it's ethical engagement and research that is led by community becomes a very important emphasis within the institution, and PVC Indigenous roles in support and lead those conversations with DVCRs and research active scholars in terms of progressing research, but meeting the needs of the community. In terms of community engagement, I think our roles are central to our roles is how we engage with our communities. And in fact, for me, that is really the first reference point. And that includes the external communities, but also our student communities as well. And finally, I also think that governance within the university, having governance mechanisms within our institutions to actually support the deliverables in relation to all the areas of university engagement, as well as reconciliation action plans, is very important. What I do think that having the PVC Indigenous roles does do is actually have that greater visibility. And also, as Shane said, we're at the table having these conversations about Indigenous engagement. And it's about a commitment and a shared accountability, not only in terms of our roles as Indigenous peoples, because as PVCIs, we are accountable as well, but also the whole university engagement in terms of really working towards those deliverables. I guess also what I wanted to say though is we're not here by accident. We're here because we've had many Indigenous peoples in the higher education space for over 20 to 30 years. And so I don't ever take that for granted. And so I acknowledge all the Indigenous leaders that have come before me and come into the future in recognising that capacity and pipeline that we hope to build within the university sector. I also I fundamentally believe that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have something to offer universities. We have long held philosophies and scholarship and leadership from time immemorial, and that is only a strength of our communities. And as Indigenous peoples, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, we can contribute to a better world and a more sustainable future.
So likewise, you have summed up some of the very key issues, the advances, the current state of play. I'm interested that you referred to the reconciliation action plans and how they have become an important feature of all organizations, particularly universities. And Shane, you talked about how many universities now have Pro-Vice-Chancellors focusing on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander engagement. Simone, you also referred to the fact that this current situation builds on 20 to 30 years of some examples, some significant examples in terms of this engagement, and enables new steps to be taken. You've referred, both of you, to the internal focus of your works, but also the external one, and that issue of visibility in the wider community. The term community engagement is obviously critical to any university endeavour, but we have the extension of that in the current context, particularly in the current context of Reconciliation Week. Community engagement can mean many things. One of the things it should mean is the process of reconciliation. So can we hone in a bit, Shane and Simone, to the issue of reconciliation in the higher education sector? So starting with you, Professor Hearn, why is reconciliation in the higher education sector so important?
Just make sure I'm unmuted. Well, it's an interesting question, Lynn, and I guess going back, so most people who have been students at universities will remember arriving for the first time, the thrill of freedom, the hope of discovering new things. Your social life is scaled up, so you meet more people than you did in high school, and you're probably in a more diverse setting, probably more diverse at Flinders than it is at the University of Adelaide. But you're an adult now, and you can vote, you form relationships, you can call demonstrations if you wish. But more importantly, you're in an engaged environment to learn. And part of learning is understanding the nation's history. And the first step is accepting it for what it is, and then accepting it for what it's not, and then consider the type of future that you would like. And you know, if we're going to tell the university's history, it should start with the acknowledgement of Aboriginal history and land. A lot of universities reside on Aboriginal land. The University of Adelaide is on Kaurna land, and we're trying to pay our respects to our custodians in many ways. I've just come from a meeting this morning showing our Chancellor the new learning circle that we're putting together. And this is a centerpiece of the university that really does open up dialogue around Kaurna culture, but pave the way for talks about reconciliation and new ways of forming partnerships with Aboriginal people. So universities, I guess, are supposed to deepen understanding of the world. And for reconciliation, this is to understand past grievances and hopefully bring together Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal groups as a cohesive group to actively move towards building, rebuilding a broken, damaged relationship. And this I really believe that it starts with students having these critical discussions. The question, I guess, is one that might be more framed about, you know, how higher education needs a reconciliation agenda. And I guess to consider that, you'd need to look at the mutual benefit of reconciliation for the institution as a whole. So part of this is understanding what, besides the learning in an institution, there's a lot of collaboration, there's partnerships formed, there's people working together across a university from the student level upwards, creating value. And the reconciliation framework really does offer actions on how you can do that. Like no other document, it really does prescribe how you will form relationships, respectful relationships. And collaboration and partnerships are of critical importance for universities. And also it shifts the schema and the dynamic around the relationship, that Aboriginal people are participating in higher education, that they are in senior roles, and it invites non-Aboriginal people to the discussion to understand more about our history. With more honest and open education, I think non-Aboriginal Australians can form a deeper understanding of the impacts of colonisation, and in turn a greater respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which will lead to a more robust workforce with Aboriginal people holding positions of leadership. And that's, I think, that really is the policy logic, the core logic, the central narrative around why reconciliation is important for the higher education system.
Professor Simone, what would you like to say about this?
So similarly, in relation to Shane, I think reconciliation is a process and it's a journey. And I agree in the sense that what it allows us to do is set a mutual agenda based on respect and reciprocity. I think universities have a particular role as sites of knowledge production in terms of the representation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Universities have played a key role in that. And so reconciliation is about a process of providing the Indigenous perspectives within our curriculum as part of the narrative of our institutions, but also changing that narrative and engaging in a process of truth telling. And I think once you can set that foundation of truth telling and the role of knowledge production, which historically has sometimes had negative representations of Indigenous peoples, or in fact an erasure of knowledge within institutions, what reconciliation supports is bringing those knowledges to the fore and actually having an open and genuine dialogue. Also, I think higher education is something that is a wonderful aspiration to achieve, to actually go through the process of being in a higher education institution, to engage in critical ideas in relation to a shared society, in terms of the professions that we may enter into or the work that we undertake with our communities. I think it really provides a wonderful place to engage in education. And I've worked in the higher education sector for over 20 years, and I've watched many students come through Flinders University specifically, but more broadly as well, and have seen that journey of entering into the education space, often as first generations at that time, but now we are seeing that shift and seeing the impact that's had on their individual lives, but also their community and collective lives. And so in that sense, I think reconciliation can actually support these agendas, but it is a journey and it requires action. It has to be action oriented, but also the symbolic is very important as well. And as you enter into Flinders University, as part of our 2016 celebrations of 50 years of Flinders, what you see is as you enter is that we are on Kaurna land on the Bedford Park campus. And so that is a symbolic acknowledgement of the country that we're located on.
Well, thank you very much, Simone. From both of you, Shane and Simone, I've drawn out a number of things that I think are key for us to latch onto. The need to understand the nation's history, what it is and what it was, to then look at the issue of providing an Indigenous perspective into the community narratives, and not just having it there to be viewed, but to actually end up changing the narrative is what you've both been speaking about, the kind of action-oriented necessity. And that then brings into play issues of the mutuality of the process. Reconciliation is, of course, a mutual process. To reconcile, you must reconcile two things together. And so that interactivity that comes. But the need in that context for Aboriginal positions of leadership, not just in terms of Aboriginality, but in terms of the wider community perspective, becomes so important. So thank you both very much for your comments on that. But I think very often there's a capacity to agree on the feel-good factor of a statement, of a word, reconciliation, and to make a commitment that we want to see more reconciliation. But that's not easy, as clearly the task has been shown. So both Shane and Simone, what has made the process from where you stand, maybe your own roles, but also those who have come before you in dealing with this work in your institutions, what has made it difficult or easy to achieve progress in moving towards a vision of a more reconciled community? What has worked well, for example?
Would you like to go first, Simone?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So from my perspective, I think one of the critical aspects, I guess, to my own development and leadership within Flinders is actually being part of the Indigenous education space, so in Yungarendi, which was Yungarendi First Nations Centre when I first started, but now is the Office of Indigenous Strategy and Engagement. And in that sense, the Indigenous Centre has given me a sense of belonging, an ownership within the institution, a right to be here. And I think that's been something that's been quite critical. What that's allowed me to do as an Indigenous person in the institution is build a collective community. And I think seeing Indigenous people within universities as communities as well, I think for me has been a particularly important element to being within higher education. It does also mean the ongoing commitment to conversations, and sometimes hard conversations, and engaging with discussions about ideas of how race and in fact racism can enter all parts of society, and what role we can do as leaders and in a place that does engage in knowledge production to actually have critical engagement with these issues as a society. So that I guess in that sense that is part of the challenge, but it's also part of the responsibility, I think, of being within a higher education institution. What that means in a sense, though, for me, is that requires a shared weight bearing, is what I call it. The load is shared amongst Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And I think that's very important, which requires a collective effort. And it's also acknowledging as part of that collective effort that colonialism continues to impact on Indigenous peoples today.
Thanks, Simone. Shane?
Well, sadly, Lynn, we're a long way off to saying that this is an easy achievement. The first step is, having a reconciliation. It's a major shift, but I guess it assumes a certain congruence on strategic interests here, and strategic interests are not always aligned and possibly at odds. So the PVC position's role is to connect people to the reconciliation document. Reconciliation is easier said than done. It's a dial that moves slowly and a dial that we have to keep on working. Surmounting these, I think, surmounting these barriers requires people to unlearn a number of lessons in society that society has taught them. And through engaging with a reconciliation framework that emphasises this transformation, to engage in relationships, to have respectful relationships and look for the opportunities to work together, is really, a signal of individual leadership. But to not recognise that the reconciliation framework is set in universities really is no longer an option. They're here, and they're only going to grow, and they're only going to become more and more part of university strategic logic. Personally, I've been involved in the development of 3 RAPs. 2 of those I chaired and led the process. And the development of RAPs is a long process. You really have to be certain in terms of how this connects with the university mission and vision, and how people will individually or faculty will connect with this overall. It's, the culmination of a number of people committing time and hard work, and they're from diverse, the key is to have them from diverse areas within the university, people that can influence their own areas. What I found in my experience is that the people who have joined or wanted to be part of the process are totally committed to reconciliation, and they connect, they're able to connect very quickly that with the university strategic narrative. So I think you need to surround yourself with great people, enthusiastic people who want to leave the university a better place than they found it, really. You want to address the continued displacement of responsibility around this. The most important goal of reconciliation is to ensure the players, the conditions and the environment is fully supported to normalise reconciliation. Non-Aboriginal people are really important allies in this process. Throughout the 3 that I've been involved in, the dialogue's been different in terms of who should lead this. It's my personal view that Aboriginal people should, that this should be part of the monitoring of a PVC or a DVC position, because that way we know that it will be, that the goals will be achieved. So, you know, I think they're not easy. They're not easy things to achieve. They're great milestones for universities. They're an offer, and they're a way of engaging all parts of the university in terms of the structure, the actions. Everyone's clear in terms of what they need to achieve through this document. One of the fantastic things that we've seen with the University of Adelaide Reconciliation Action Plan, Yangalicha, is that we've had our procurement group really stand up and take charge on how they might achieve the goals that the targets that they've set within the Reconciliation Action Plan. And these are important aspects for universities to start to build their Aboriginal supply chain, especially in South Australia. So we're really pleased in terms of how people are engaging with the document. And sometimes that's the easier part, when you can connect to core business, when you can connect to the business area in a meaningful way that adds value, really is able to articulate the benefit. And I think that's the journey. They're the types of things that I've experienced over the journey of developing 3 reconciliation action plans that have been a great opportunity for me, but they're a fantastic process to be involved in.
Thank you very much, Shane. And you both brought together a number of key phrases that I think are worth us remembering. The need to unlearn lessons from the past. The fact that we have to have hard conversations. We need an effective, supportive environment for this to take place, and there needs to be critical engagement. You both then led into what I think segues into our next questions. One is the load needs to be shared and the issue of working together. Now, I have 2 questions here that were actually separate, but I'm going to combine them together now into one, because Shane, you've again referred to the criticality of RAPs, of the Reconciliation Action Plans. The 2 questions which I'd like you to comment on. This is Reconciliation Week, and in a moment after you've answered the questions, I'll be asking Shona to comment. And the theme has been "In This Together." What can we do together to make this a successful journey? And that then just, I'd say, joins or complements very usefully the next question I'm going to ask. Are there any actions that people watching today can take from your own university's RAP, Reconciliation Action Plan, that they could implement in their community, business or workplace? So now, Simone, do you want to start answering this? First of all, the theme of National Reconciliation Week, we're in this together, and then the takeouts from the RAP.
Thank you, Lynn. I'd be happy to. I think in terms of the theme "In This Together," for me, what that talks to, as I've mentioned previously, is that collective effort and a shared process. And with that comes a shared weight bearing, as I've mentioned. I think that is an important part of reconciliation. And what I've been really privileged to observe is the goodwill of communities. And in fact, reconciliation is just as much a people movement as it is an institutional movement. And so I think that goodwill centres a lot of that. I do acknowledge, though, that reconciliation may mean different things for different members of the community. And I guess we do need to respect that diversity and recognise that reconciliation is an ongoing process and an ongoing commitment to actions for change. But I also think it's about, in in this together. It's also about celebrating our successes. I think it's really important that we need to acknowledge when we actually do succeed and that we have stepped up to the challenges in the institution. And I think for me that takes the maturity of a community and a nation to do that. In terms of my university, we are in the first process of actually initiating a reconciliation action plan, and we will be having a launch on Monday to celebrate this event. I think the key elements that again demonstrated by a university is that commitment to a reconciliation action plan. And I mentioned previously there are symbolic representations, but then there have to be embedded strategic commitments within the institution as well. And that means really sitting at the table in those governance structures of the institution to be able to engage in the discussions of the institution from an Indigenous perspective. And it is about recognising that Indigenous peoples have always been part of this country. And hence I mentioned before about as you enter into the Bedford Park campus, you walk in and you see the words "We are on Kaurna land." And that as Indigenous peoples, we've always been connected to our country as well. One of the initiatives that Flinders has taken on board through the leadership in SA and in NT, particularly through the Post Centre, is also the appointment of Ghana into the future, Ghana Elder on campus, but also a Larrakia Elder on campus, a senior Larrakia man, Uncle Richard Fijo in Darwin, and also soon to be appointed Auntie Pat Miller in Aranda country in Alice Springs, is about recognising the contribution of Indigenous communities' knowledges to universities. And in doing that, this recognition occurring through elders on campus, but also cultural advisors. I do take some of the cultural teachings from my own community, from the Yankunytjatjara community, and from some many senior women that taught me over the years from the Pupapiti Konkajura. That is many women from Pupapiti who were part of the 1990 Iridi Wanti campaign, Leave the Poison. And that was about working in protection of country in relation to nuclear dump proposals. And what they taught me, and it's the sentiment I take into my role, is that we must always talk straight and talk strong and never stop talking about issues of importance. And I think that's a really important message that I take into the work I do, and that universities can do as well. So I think there are lots of initiatives that can be undertaken, being at the table of decision making, recognise the importance of collective engagement as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and as communities within university institutions that are grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing, being and doing.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks, Simone. Shane, would you like to answer?
Yeah, no, I think that Simone really did lay that out nicely, and I totally agree with that position. I mean, it was really well weaved together. To tell a story, I mean, when I first, one of the first meetings I had with our Vice-Chancellor, I guess this sort of demonstrates the power of the Reconciliation Action Plan. He asked me what a RAP was. And then when we launched, he conveyed that the Aboriginal operations was part of the university DNA. And these are major shifts that were enabled by this process, by this document. So in terms of, you know, as Simone says, in terms of the collective effort and the shared process, sometimes they resonate in big ways. To have your chief, you know, be honest and vulnerable about their understanding, and then to really see the value of that at the highest level within the institution is a major thing. And it really does demonstrate that these documents are agile, they're dynamic. The feedback that we've had from the university, because we lean in and we listen, is that, you know, the layout of these are really good for the organisation's operation, for accountability and responsibility. So we were pleased to receive that feedback. In terms of what can people take, well, these are public documents. They can take whatever they want from our 80 action plans. They're really relevant to our institution, our sector. We look at research, we look at teaching, embedding Indigenous knowledges, we look at the operations, procurement, all aspects of the university's business are incorporated in this document. And there's not a lot of documents that bring all these parts together. Generally, they're moving parts in these big institutions, but these documents enable people to come and have a platform to work from and understand the organisation through a reconciliation lens. And it's a fantastic thing and a major achievement for the movement. So they're welcome to use any action that they would like. But I guess let me conclude with these observations. And if we are to find confidence to navigate this terrain, we must recognise the value of partnership, of collective effort, as Simone said, and shared process. The value of partnerships and reconciliation can also, more importantly, it's about reframing identity. It's about reframing us as a cohesive group of Australians, first Australians and Australians that are coming together and understanding our history and moving forward in a respectful way. So I think one of the real important aspects of reconciliation documents is that it reframes our identity as Australians. It tells the national story from the start where it should be told, and that's the Indigenous narrative. And the value of the knowledges that innovated a culture for so long, sustained a culture for so long. These are important things that all Australians, not just Aboriginal people, should connect to. It's a fantastic history. We have a beautiful culture, and everyone should be a part of this.
Thank you, Shane. You know, you've both picked up some important issues here that I think we should just identify. The need to think about reframing identity. The fact that other people come their own journey, and your reference to the Vice-Chancellor starting from a what is it position to this is part of our DNA. The issue of never stop talking and talking straight, understanding that things may be, that reconciliation may mean different things to different people, that it is an ongoing shared process. Now, that actually, I want to slot in one more question here before we have to wind up. The reference that that ongoing process implies that we can't ever reach a point at which we would say, oh, we're reconciled now, it's all done, it's all fixed up. But it is not like that. We are living human beings interacting one with another, and the process of reconciliation is an expression of that livingness together, not a stasis of a point in time. The RAP is a document. How does the RAP become a living document for the institutions that you both work at, for example? Shane, do you want to start with this?
Sure, thank you, Lynn. The executive officer to the Chancellor said to me that it's taken the institution 140 years to have mandatory acknowledgement at the commencement of semester, at major events. We have a policy, our 630 policy now is that at major events we need to welcome a country or acknowledge the Kaurna country that the university's campuses are on. And these are major shifts in organisations that are cultivating change all the time, but don't really change very quickly themselves. Look, I think reconciliation is, it's really about, developing shared vision, one that's based on a fair society. It acknowledges dealing with the past. It builds positive relationships, and it facilitates cultural and attitudinal change. And these are really predisposing factors to enabling substantial social, economic and political change. And more than ever, we really need to embrace diversity, embrace each other. And with the COVID-19 isolation of most people means that now it's time to bring the circle back in. And reconciliation really does offer the blueprint on how you do that. And within our documents, the common goals are they're action orientated. So really people need to just connect with them and work in their partnerships. One of the most important things in our document, because I think the universities still need to fund these like other strategic documents, and they need to be in that process like other strategic documents. We have funding for a reconciliation officer, Samara Young, who is so passionate about this space and really knowledgeable with a wealth of experience and is a really good person. So we're fortunate to have this person driving it, checking in on people, supporting people. And I'm not sure how it would go without having that infrastructure, those resources in behind a document like this, because as Simone would know, as a PVC, you're almost managing a micro university. You're looking at research, you're looking at curriculum, you're looking at student services, you're working with community, you're mobilising corporate philanthropic donations. All these things are balls that are juggling all the time. So you really need a strong group of people behind you who connect with this, who are present to the reconciliation process. And I think I'm very fortunate that we have that.
Thank you, Shane. Simone, do you want to comment on this, the organic nature, the living nature of the RAP?
Shane's words, I think for me, reconciliation it's a living process. And whilst these documents may seem static in the way they look, they're actually a living process. And I think that what that requires, as Shane has mentioned, is that demonstrated shared leadership and commitment. And I think part of that for me is also a really important process of critical reflection and reflexivity to actually assess the journey that we've gone through, to maybe shift or nuance some of our approaches toward to the future. So in a sense, I very much think it is about that shared, collective, senior responsibility, but actually everyone has a role in reconciliation. Everyone in our university and in the community can be active in the reconciliation process. And one of the lovely things that I observed through the consultation process that we undertook through developing our RAP was the commitment of staff and students in all areas of the institution, which says to me people are critical to the process. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Simone. And that's drawing us close to the end of our time together. And so what I'd now like to do is to ask Shona Reid, the Executive Director of Reconciliation SA, to first of all to thank our speakers, and secondly to answer the question, where to from here? So Shona.
Sorry. Hi, Lynn, and thanks Shane and Simone and Dunstan Foundation for checking in with us and helping bring this to life. It's really important looking at the reconciliation agenda in the higher education system. It is essential. Let's think about it. The higher education sector is feeding our future professionals in this space, and if we are able to give a solid platform, then the movement, a reconciliation movement, has for maybe the first time a chance to get on the front foot and start challenging some of the really systemic and structural barriers that sit in place for Aboriginal people to participate fully in our society. And we pride ourselves in Australia about giving everybody a fair go. But I can tell you from the conversations that we see and hear is that there is significant inequity. It still exists for Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people right across Australia in many different places, and down to standards of living, access to education, access to a number of things. And it is up to movements like these to provide an opportunity for instance, the higher education sector to step up and to feed that information and to provide avenues for activity and awareness raising and unlearning and relearning. All of that happens in this space, and it's critical. And I'm really excited that Adelaide and Flinders and USA have really committed to this space around reconciliation. And it is a living document when people are so passionate and have the drive to do it. But it's about how the staff and students engage in that process. So really at the end of the day, you can have these documents, but it does come down to personal responsibility around engaging in the reconciliation movement. And it comes down to people doing a bit of reflection about what their role is and what role they have in engaging and answering emails and attending conversations and listening in lectures and actively seeking out wisdom and knowledge that sits out there, because one of the things that does really well, universally is when we find our uniqueness as a country or as an entity, that's when we feel our strongest. And Australia's uniqueness sits in First Nations people, absolutely, categorically, that's where it is. That's what makes us different from every other country in the world. And it's something to feel proud about, and it's something that we can, springboard off and prosper from, because that is something of value to us. It can't be bought. It's something that we have to learn about and cherish. So, where to for reconciliation in the higher education sectors? You've got a great platform around your reconciliation action plans. You've got lots of people joining conversations and wanting to be a part of things. It's a people's movement. We need people in on it. So that's around how do you then recruit allies into this space, and how do the universities and how do the students and how the systems within the universities recruit allies. And that's the gig now is, we need Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people in this space. Reconciliation is a movement of relationships and the growing and the developing of relationships. And I think that's the exciting bit to it, because that is ever evolving. And you talked about it being an ongoing process. It is an ongoing process, and it always will be, because it is about human beings and our evolving nature. And, we've seen it with COVID-19. We've evolved into these amazing square things that sit in front of our faces as we talk to each other all the time. But we are evolving and having new and different conversations. And that's just a little bit exciting, because it means we get to have more conversations about what it means for a fair and equitable society in South Australia. And that's what Reconciled does. It constantly wants to introduce this into the conversations. And we're really proud to partner with Dunstan in a whole bunch of things, but particularly conversations with, Shane and Simone. And having an open yarn like this and answering some questions is a great way to start. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Shona, indeed. And so this ongoing process does require ongoing support. So become a member of Reconciliation SA. And in the feedback request that we will send to you all, we will also be including a link to Reconciliation SA, just checking that's going to happen. And also the call to all of us to support this positive endeavour in our higher education sector, not only for what it's doing within itself, but also for what it contributes to the wider community in issues such as this. So, excuse me, thank you for joining us today to recognise Reconciliation Week to this particular event, and excuse me, and take part in the other activities that will be taking place. As I say, we will be sending you a feedback form and would greatly appreciate your input. And the questions that you have already submitted, we will be sending them to Simone and Shane in case they want to make any additional comments to that, and those comments can be fed back as we receive them from them. Now, I mentioned that this is normally the week we have the Lower O'Donoghue oration. It will now be later in the year, most likely November, and Pat Anderson is to be our orator this year. We have had a wonderful series of orations in Lowich's honour since the scheme first started back, since the oration first started back in 2007. And this year we are launching a book that contains all the orations that have been given since the start, since the very first one, which was given, of course, by Lowich herself. It's a digital book, and so look for it online. It's a fantastic read, very well presented. Obviously, I have a hard copy here in front of me, and it reminds us that reconciliation is indeed an ongoing effort, and together we can build mutual respect and understanding. The first 10 pre-orders of this book will receive a free copy. All orders after that will be $15, which will support the work of the Foundation's social justice work. Now we are drawing to the close, so can I thank once again sincerely our speakers, Professor Simone from Flinders University and Professor Shane Hearn from the University of Adelaide, and also, of course, Shona Reid, Executive Director of Reconciliation SA, for giving the vote of thanks. And I'd also like to thank Reconciliation SA for partnering with the Don Dunstan Foundation in this event. And of course, a big thank you to BHP for their ongoing support, commitment to reconciliation, as well as their sponsorship of this event, as I also thank the University of Adelaide and Flinders University as Foundation's major partners. So to all of you out there, thank you for being a part of this. We've been very pleased at the rate of bookings we had for this, this webinar, and we look forward to your ongoing commitment, like us here at the Foundation and in Reconciliation SA. Until the next time, goodbye.